welcome to Driving to the Hoops Basketball Diaries. It's a beautiful day here in Rochester, New York, almost warm, which is pretty rare in this neck of the woods. So anyway, thanks for listening in. I've wanted to talk today a little about a topic from a couple of weeks ago where they were debating who was the greatest college basketball player of all time, and somehow Michael Jordan got in that conversation and actually was voted the #1 college basketball player of all time. I feel like that's a bit of a default answer that maybe a lot of young people just voted. Well, we know Jordan's the best NBA player ever, because we hear that all the time. So he must have been the greatest college basketball player, right? And that's not necessarily true. When you look at his success in college, yeah, he won one national championship, but let's be honest, in that scenario, A, it was a loaded team, and B, he wasn't the best player on the team necessarily at that point. It was definitely James Worthy. I know Worthy kind of jokes around that he realized he wasn't the best player on the team after about 2 weeks of Jordan arriving, but it was still Worthy's team. Now, you know, Jordan's numbers aren't very gaudy in college. You know, you would think he would have averaged 40 a game or whatever, but I don't even think he was up over 20 a game, to be honest with you. And there's always that ongoing joke that the only person that could hold Jordan under 30 was Coach Dean Smith of the UNC Tar Heels. So, you know, was he great in college? Absolutely. His athletic ability was unreal, and when he got those chains lifted off him in the pros, he really took off and immediately was already, you could have argued by his third year, the best shooting guard maybe ever. He was that good right out the gate. But as far as being the greatest college player, I would have to say no to that. And I think a lot of players, or a lot of people that talk about basketball, would agree with that. You had so many players, such as, you know, you go back to Bill Russell was a great college player. Of course, Kareem was the greatest college player, and we'll get into that maybe. Bill Walton, David Thompson, Pistol Pete Maravich. I mean, Maravich averaged, 44 a game in college. So, I mean, still has those scoring records there. I mean, and then you could even, you know, make some arguments for some other guys, like Tim Duncan was a great college player, Christian Laettner, you know, a couple of Magic Johnson, and of course, I almost forgot him. To me, if not the best, one of the best was Larry Bird, simply because he took an unknown school to 30-something odd wins. They were undefeated the entire season, and then they make it to the national championship game. Of course, ultimately lose to Magic Johnson and Michigan State. So they were just a better team. There was no way ISU was going to beat Michigan State that day. So still the most heralded college basketball game of all time was Bird versus Magic, Magic versus Bird, Indiana State versus Michigan State. Just an amazing event, right? And so another guy that gets kind of forgotten about in that conversation is David Thompson. I don't think people realize how good he was either. And that was kind of Jordan's idol growing up, was David Thompson. He played at North Carolina State, and he was a great player. He had some unbelievable lift, especially for that time. That was back in the mid-70s, early mid-70s, and they didn't allow dunking. And there's so many highlights of David Thompson, if you go look it up, of his head just right up on the rim. And the guy wasn't that tall. He was like 6'3", 6'4". He played shooting guard, maybe small forward in college, and even in the pros he might have. He had such a lift that he could get away with being a little undersized and play a small forward spot. So some great highlights by him. He averaged more points than Jordan. And then you got Bill Walton. He had such an incredible run with UCLA, and similarly to Kareem, where they, you know, had a great coach and a great system and great teammates. And they rattled off some championships there. And of course, Walton's NBA career was cut short with injuries. Same with David Thompson. But so it's easy to forget those guys, how good they were when they maybe weren't as impactful in the NBA for whatever reason. You look at, I mentioned Larry Bird, where they was undefeated and went to the championship. Magic that year was amazing. He was a 20-year-old 6'8" point guard. We'd never seen nothing like that, and he just took the basketball world by storm. He was amazing. If you go back a little further, of course, Pistol Pete Maravich, like I mentioned earlier, played at LSU, didn't have a ton of success, but if you look at it from an individual perspective, how good he was, averaging 44 points a game, maybe 4 or 5 assists, and he was just an unbelievable talent. They didn't win a lot. They didn't have a whole lot around him either. Of course, I imagine a lot of players weren't trying to go to LSU when Maravich arrived because they knew they weren't going to get many touches, and therefore their NBA prospects would have dropped tremendously, I'm sure, trying to play in his shadow. And then, again, going back to Kareem, when you look at, as I've mentioned before in a video on him being arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, is he the greatest college basketball player? To me, it's not even close. When you look at a guy who dropped 2 games in 4 years, 3 championships in a row, I mean, just his numbers are gaudy. I mean, he was up 25, 27 a game, close to 30 at some points. Just an unbelievable college player. And again, playing under the UCLA umbrella there. That was such a powerhouse back then. But it was a great team, great player. A couple of other guys that I'm not sure they were better than Jordan necessarily, but they certainly were great players that were up there in that upper echelon of players that you don't hear much about, you know, like Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, you know, Larry Johnson and that crew at UNLV. They were really good in college. Went on to have solid NBA careers, but not spectacular. You know, to argue that Jordan's the greatest NBA player or not, you know, you could talk about that all day. But for me, saying he's the greatest college player, I don't even think it's close. And I think it was just kind of one of those like, well, we know Jordan, we know he's the best NBA player, so he must be the greatest college player kind of thing. You know, that's kind of what you get when you take surveys and polls like that, right, with people that may not be the most informed. But anyway, I'd love to see your comments on this and see where you would place Jordan maybe in all-time great college players. And then who's your top 3, you know, college players of all time? Mine's Kareem is number 1, probably Bird number 2. Number 3 gets a little hairy there. You could either go with Bill Walton or David Thompson, and they would both argue with each other that the other one's better. They had a good relationship, and they played around the same time too. So just to love to see your thoughts on this and leave some comments. I do hope you liked the video, and if you did, press the like button and go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Hope you have a good holidays, and we'll see you next week.